what it takes to do the impossible. When I say something like ultimate human performance out loud and in public, most people tend to think of anybody but themselves. We picture astronauts or Navy SEALs or genius innovators. Action and adventure sport athletes have achieved more impossible feats than pretty much any group in history. And this raises a pretty basic question. What the heck is going on? And the answer is a state of consciousness known as flow, that these athletes have learned to harness probably better than almost any group in history. You may know flow by other names. You may talk about it as runner's high, being unconscious, being in the zone. Flow is a technical term, and it's defined as an optimal state of consciousness, when we feel our best and we perform our best. More specifically, it refers to those moments of rapt attention and total absorption, where you get so focused on the task at hand that everything else disappears. Action and awareness start to merge. Your sense of self vanishes. Time passes strangely. Sometimes it'll slow down, you'll get a freeze frame effect. More frequently, it speeds up and 5 hours pass by in like 5 minutes. And throughout, all aspects of performance, both mental and physical, go through the roof. About 15 years ago, our brain imaging technology got good enough that for the very first time, we could peer under the hood and figuring out where this ultimate performance was coming from. And what we discovered turned a lot of our old ideas about high performance on its head. The old idea was that at any normal time, we're only using a small sliver of our brain. So ultimate performance must be the full brain on overdrive. Turns out we actually had it exactly backwards. In flow, we're not using more of the brain, we're using a lot less. Instead of the brain becoming hyperactive, it's becoming hypoactive. H-Y-P-O, it's the opposite of hyper. It means to slow down or deactivate. Now, when your sense of self goes quiet, it turns off your inner critic. That nagging, always on, defeatist voice in your head, your inner Woody Allen. In flow, Woody goes quiet. Now we experience this as liberation, as freedom. We're actually getting out of our own way. Risk-taking goes up. Creativity goes up. Now, besides these changes in neural anatomical function, we also get a big dump of neurochemistry in flow. 5 of the most potent neurochemicals the brain can produce show up in the state, and flow appears to be the only time we get access to all 5 at once. First of all, it enhances all aspects of physical performance. Muscle reaction time increases. Our sense of pain gets deadened, so strength increases. But the bigger impact is cognitive, mental performance. These neurochemicals surround all 3 sides of the so-called high performance triangle: motivation, creativity, and learning. In motivation, these 5 chemicals that show up, they're all pleasure drugs. In fact, they're the 5 most potent pleasure drugs the brain can produce, which means flow is one of the most addictive states on Earth. Researchers don't like the word addictive, so instead they talk about it as the source code of intrinsic motivation. But this motivation is so great that when McKinsey did a 10-year study, they found that top executives in flow report being 500% more productive than out of flow. That's a huge leap in productivity. That's a huge leap in motivation. And we see something similar with creativity. Creativity is a word that gets mistaken a lot, but it fundamentally is a recombinatory process. It's what happens when the brain takes in novel information, combines it with old ideas to come up with something startlingly new. And the neurochemicals that show up in flow surround this process. When you're in the state, you take in more information per second, you pay more attention to that information, you find greater links between that information and closely related ideas, what's called pattern recognition, and you find greater leaps between that information and far-flung ideas, what's called lateral thinking. In fact, creativity is so surrounded that most researchers have found that creativity spikes 400% in flow. Something similar happens to learning. Quick shorthand for how learning works in the brain is the more neurochemicals that show up during an experience, the better chance that experience has of moving from short-term holding into long-term storage. What we've discovered is 2 things that are important. The first is that flow is ubiquitous, shows up in anyone, anywhere, provided certain initial conditions are met. Second of all, what are those conditions? turns out flow states have triggers. These are preconditions that lead to more flow. There are 20 of them in total. First thing to know is that flow follows focus. It can only show up when all our attention is focused in the right here, right now. That's what these triggers do. They drive attention into the present moment. Another way of thinking about this is these are 20 of the things that evolution shaped our brain to pay the most attention to. And what we see in action and adventure sport athletes is they built their lives around these triggers. They're extremely passionate about what they do, and that matters here because we pay more attention to those things that we believe in. They take very, very big risks, and risks is another great focusing mechanism. It drives attention into the now. And they take those risks in novel, unpredictable, complex environments that produce a lot of fast feedback and a lot of sensory input. All these things grab hold of attention and drive it into the now and allow them to produce tremendous amounts of flow. But it turns out it's not actually just action and adventure sport athletes who do this. Pretty much every high-performing individual and organization you can think of, we've looked at, and we've found they all do the same thing. So Navy SEALs, some of the top educational institutions in America, best startups in Silicon Valley, Fortune 500 companies, the people running Fortune 500 companies, they have built their organizations around these triggers to maximize flow. I think this information puts a wonderful, yet sort of terrible burden on all of us. What grand challenges are you aching to solve? What in your life currently seems impossible? What would you go after if you could be 500% more productive? If you could be 400% more creative? If you could cut your learning times in half? This is what flow makes possible. This is what's available to you today.